Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for a national call for Peacemakers. We're going to get started. Now we have a powerful lineup this evening that we're going to kick off with our CEO, Janae Lewis.
Thank you, Dora. Good evening, everyone. As you can see, I am in a car, but don't worry, I'm not driving. I am in transit from one event to another, but very happy to join you this evening. Um, this evening, as we gather, we're going to hear from some powerful speakers who are sharing their leadership as motivated by their faith backgrounds and their faith traditions in this time of rising violence and hatred in our society. And I don't need to expound on that. We all know that it's here, and we know that it's been building over time. And sadly, in the last week, it has culminated in violence against Haitian immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, and a second potential assassination attempt against a major political candidate. And these are only small examples that are making national news, but we know all across the country, in our communities and in our lives, violence has been rising against anyone who is perceived to be the other. We have leaders who are exploiting our neighbors, our family members, our friends, and us in order to have political gain, making our family members and our friends and our community members seem like a villain or a threat or a criminal. And then we have violence in our lives. We have violence in our homes. We have people suffering from domestic violence. We have children who are murdering each other in our streets. And all of that creates trauma in our communities. I have witnessed someone being robbed and shot at gunpoint in front of my home. Many of us know women who are victims of sexual assault and domestic violence. But in the midst of all of that, we are people of faith. We are leaders, and we know that in our faith traditions, not only do we have wisdom that calls us into a better way of being with one another, but we also have practices that help us navigate these times. We have practices that help us grieve and lament the loss of what we're experiencing. We have practices that help us reconcile with one another when we experience conflict. We have practices that help us hold each other accountable in ways that do not lose sight of each other's dignity and that do not sacrifice our love for one another. And so that's what we're going to hear about this evening. We're going to hear from peacemakers who have gone to our faith traditions, who have gone to our values, who have gone to our God and asked for help and wisdom and guidance about how to intervene in these times, how to hold the paradox and the complexity of what we're facing, and how to lead with prophetic witness so that we can transform our society into one where we all feel that we belong and where all of our human rights are sacred and where we all know and understand how we can thrive. So I welcome you again to this call, and I invite you to join us as peacemakers. I hope that you are inspired by the witnesses that you hear this evening and that you continue to lead in your own communities in ways that are going to bring us peace and joy and love throughout this election season and beyond. With that, I will turn it back over to Dora. Have a nice evening.
Thank you so much, Janae, for that grounding. And we're going to kick off the lineup with two of our peacemakers who have been clergy for more than 20 years each. And so their profound wisdom that Janae was talking about, I invited them to share stories from, we have Reverend Dr. Valerie Bridgman, founder and CEO of Women Preach. She's also a dean at Methodist Theological School in Ohio. And along with her is Reverend Julio Hernandez, the interim executive director at Congregation Action Network. But he's also a Baptist pastor. And both of them come with unique sort of experiences shepherding their peers and their congregations within the immediate face and threat of violence. Dr. Bridgman from the J6 insurrection and Reverend Julio shared an experience with me that echoed the principle of protection when we launched our Faith and Fair Elections campaign earlier this year around the theme of protection. And so I invite now Dr. Bridgman to start, and then she will be followed by Reverend Julio.
Thank you so much, Dora, and to each of you. Grace and peace to you all this evening. I almost regret being the first person to go because I kind of want to hear from all of you first. I think it's funny that she said more than 20 years. I've actually been in ministry over 40 years, the preaching and teaching ministry over 40 years. This is where y'all supposed to say, wow, you look so young. Uh, But I also appreciate that this call is called Peacemaker, because I think it's important for those of us who are in the ordained ministry, no matter what tradition that is, to remember that we are not just keeping the peace, we are helping to create peace, both with our action and with our words. The piece that Dora mentioned that I shared after January 6th. I actually had written in sometime in 2013. I'm going to share it with you here in a minute. But my point here is we are always in the process of having to make peace because we are prone as humans to warring in our hearts and warring in our behaviors toward one another. So both the words we use, the actions we convey, the ways we respond are important. I said both, but all of that is important to helping to make peace, to create an environment where people can lay down their violence, both with their words and with their behaviors. The piece that I wrote for Church Anew, I'm just going to read the blessing that I shared at that time. It kind of gets at what I think is necessary for those of us to be peacemakers. So it was a blessing that I wrote back in December 2013. Don't even remember the context for that, but hear these words and then I'll say a little bit more about them and then I'll be done. So the blessing was, may God strengthen you for adversity and companion you in joy. May God give you the courage of your conviction and the wisdom to know when to speak and act. May you know peace. May you be gifted with deep, true friendship and love. May every God-breathed thing you put your hand to prosper and succeed. May you have laughter to fortify you against the disappointments. May you be brave. That's the end of the blessing. What I'm ultimately trying to say to us is that this work of peacemaking requires a bravery of heart, a bravery of spirit, but it also requires love and joy and relationships. We cannot have peacemaking without building relationships. One example, and then I'm done. We had two of our professors this past Sunday decided to go down to Springfield, Ohio. They tell the story that one of them is of Korean descent, and the other one is U.S. American white woman and queer. And they decided we want to go stand with our neighbors down in Springfield. We're about an hour away where I am in Ohio, and they were going to roll up on a Haitian church. And then it occurred to them as they were driving down to Springfield, well, it would look awfully weird for us to walk into a Haitian church. Let's go to a church of our tradition. For them, it's the United Methodist Church, and pray with the people there who are working to make peace in that community. And they did that. And the report back was that people really are trying to figure out how to stand in solidarity with their Haitian neighbors and not just let them take the brunt of violent speech, which leads to violent action. That to me is what it means to be a peacemaker. Bless you.
Thank you, Reverend Dr. Bridgman. What an honor to also follow you with your many years of wisdom and preaching ministry. My name is Julio Hernandez. My family's from El Salvador, and my family came to America prior to the Civil War in El Salvador. And then I was born here, and my family remained. Their intention was to return, but with the Civil War, we couldn't. So as a child, I have the memories of yelling over a phone line to my grandparents in El Salvador and checking in on them and worrying about their safety and my cousins and my aunts and uncles there. So violence was always a reality in my life as a child, thinking about my family in the midst of war. Um, just recently, I stepped out of church ministry to lead a nonprofit called the Congregation Action Network. But in my last church, which I ended in July 7th, not even a year out of full-time church ministry, but I do see my work as ministry, serving the community. But in that church, we had some incidents that scared the community, and I became friends. Well, sorry, let me rephrase that. I reached out to the Office of Emergency Management in our city and became friends with the two officers leading that program. And they came to our church and taught us a course called Stop the Bleed and also active shooter training. And I was quite struck by what our community needed to feel safe was what do we do in case we do face violence? We were fearful of violence because we had a large queer community in our church. We became post-pandemic a place for ex-Pentecostal queer people to return to church. I think part of it was just us offering a loving, welcome place for them to be part of a community of faith. And so post that training, one of our members would carry a Stop the Bleed pack. You can actually Google that and see more details about that on their backpack. And they felt quite empowered in that they knew what to do in case someone got shot, in case somebody was bleeding significantly as a victim of violence. But also we knew what to do if active shooter came into our building and how to find ways to lessen the damage that could be done. And then one of the most amazing things, one of our trans members attended a training where they helped de-escalate some of the tension and possibly violence and harassment that children face exiting trans story times. And one of the practices that they did, which really struck a chord with Dora, was that when kids were exiting the event, they would take umbrellas and open them and block the children from the harassment of the crowds that were yelling at the children. At least they could block the images of the people's angry faces. The words could probably still get through, but yet it was still an act of creating safety for the children and protecting them. And as we work for peace, just like Reverend Dr. Bridgman talked to us about, that we also act. It's not just our prayers as faith communities, but we also must act and use our wisdom and our talents and sometimes our bodies to protect those who are around us, who are vulnerable. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the both of you. Was incredibly moved by both of those stories for a couple of reasons. Like one, it is one thing to articulate safety and peace. It's another thing to embody it in your actions and in how you care for those around you. And particularly when we launched, our staff called the launch of our Fair Elections campaign Umbrella Day. And Reverend Julio didn't know that. And we named it Umbrella Day because it was attached to Ruth Bader Ginsburg's statement in her decision, her dissent for basically the gutting of the Voting Rights Act of preclearance. That is like throwing away your umbrella during a storm because it's working. And so that theme of embodying and creating a sense of safety for others to help and accompany people to navigate these threats of violence. It's policy, but it's also, as Reverend Julio mentioned, our physical bodies. And just today, as staff, we were having conversations about what's happening in Springfield. And it was shared with us that those on the ground, there's pastors on the ground who are in touch with the impacted community, and a sense of those that's targeted tend to retreat from public life, right? We tend to find that sense of safety. And so as faith leaders, as peacemakers, to be able to accept the mandate to create that space in public so that faith communities and people of faith can step forward and contest and challenge for justice and equity. The next two presenters, storytellers, embody that. They have led fights legally in the courts against the weaponization of redistricting. One current lawsuit in Utah with Mormon Women for Ethical Government. And we have with us one of the co-executive directors, Jennifer Thomas. And what's particularly interesting is they, as an organization, are named plaintiff in the lawsuit, but there's individuals within their Mormon faith community who are also named, and the courage that Reverend Dr. Valerie talked about of being able to step out as a named individual was such a model that just awed me in a lawsuit. And joining her is Shivani Parikh from Sadhana in Queens, and she led a democracy project for Fordham University, but also that encompassed a lawsuit around redistricting that really harmed the Hindu community in Queens, but she galvanized. And so I want them to share their stories of what it means to actually galvanize faith communities, but you have to create a sense of safety and empowerment to do that. And these two peacemakers have done so. So first you'll hear from Jennifer and then Shivani.
Thank you, Dora. It's a real privilege to be amongst all of these illustrious peacemakers tonight, and I'm grateful to have the opportunity to share our story. As she said, I am the co-executive director of Mormon Women for Ethical Government, which is a faith-based nonpartisan grassroots organization with members in 49 of the 50 states. And we have a two-part mission. The first is to advocate for ethical governance, and particularly for us, that means protecting democracy. Our work is grounded in protecting democracy. And the second part of that mission is to help women become independent, powerful, peaceful political actors. And what that means is that we have this two-part mission, and both of those parts work harmoniously together. We always try to design our advocacy areas in a way that will allow a maximum number of women to participate across a diverse way to participate. And then we design all of our C3 activities to help prepare women to be really competent at that advocacy. And at the core of that competence is peacemaking. We are committed, we joke all the time that our political playbook is the Sermon on the Mount, and that we are absolutely committed to developing women with the capacity to engage peacefully but forcefully in defense of ethical governance and democracy. And for us, a lot of this flows from a deep faith-driven belief that one of the reasons that democracy is so important is that it is the closest we can come in government settings to really manifesting the worth we believe that every individual soul has. By giving every individual person in a community, every individual citizen, a voice and an ability to influence their government, we are acknowledging that people are equal and that they should have the power to influence their government and to create a government in their image. For us, just to tell a really brief story, we work in a lot of different advocacy areas, but specifically in 2022, we were able to file a lawsuit against the Utah State Legislature. And this was in response to in 2018, the people of Utah had passed a proposition, Prop 4, to set up an independent redistricting commission that would reset the congressional districts. That passed, but unfortunately 2 years later, the Independent Districting Commission did its work. They spent over 6 months taking in information from the people of Utah, suggestions on maps, holding hearings, a really public and very collaborative cross-partisan effort. And once they submitted those maps, the legislature instantly grabbed those vacated these maps, and over a weekend with very little allowance for public comment, set out 4 new maps that cracked the city of Salt Lake into 4 pieces. About a little bit over a year later, our then very small, very fledgling organization decided to really do what for us was a terrifying thing, to very publicly, in a state where our faith is a majority, speak out against the legislature and file suit against them. And we did this with almost no money in the bank and no way to kind of defend ourselves from the repercussions of that. But we felt very, very strongly that we were watching the rights of the people to reform their government be taken away and have them be excluded from the opportunity to change things. So we filed this lawsuit. It went through the entire process. At a certain point, it was grabbed by the Supreme Court because they knew in Utah, because they knew they would have to decide it anyway. And about a year later, just a few months ago, we actually had 5 justices unanimously decide in favor of our suit. They agreed that the Utah State Constitution guaranteed the people of Utah the right to reform their government and to recreate it in the image that they desired. And shortly thereafter, the legislature called a special session in violation of the rules of special sessions. This wasn't a famine or a time of war, and decided to put on the ballot a constitutional amendment that would vacate the Supreme Court's ruling and would take away all power from the people through the proposition process. It would give the legislature constitutional right to vacate any ballot initiative, no matter the outcome, no matter how many people had voted for it. We filed a lawsuit against this, and recently, just last week, won that lawsuit as well. And the ballot initiative was taken off the ballot. And because they saw it in both the process and the way that the legislature was, they had written the language to go on the ballot and had been deceitful. So that's just sort of the framework of the story. But what I want to share with you briefly is how absolutely important to that process at every step for us, the members of our organization were. Because they had advocated for the initial proposition, we were able to have standing as an organization. And because many members of our organization had spoken up in very nonpartisan ways in defense of this, they were eligible to be really fantastic individual plaintiffs. And so what we've seen is that this is peacemaking in action. It's individual citizens being willing to speak out and do their best to express when injustices are happening, but to also use the processes of government to advocate for peaceful resolutions to problems where high levels of contention and confrontation are existing. We are in a high conflict situation with the Utah State Legislature, but at every step, we have tried to do that in a peacemaking manner. For us, that means we do not allow injustice to stand, and we fight against suffering. Peacemaking does not tolerate injustice, and it does not tolerate suffering, but it moves toward conflict in a way that heightens the possibility of resolution and lowers the possibility of violence. And that's what we've tried to do with our advocacy around this amendment. The final thing that Dora had asked me to share, and I'll do that super quickly, is one of the ways we've done that most powerfully is through what we call our op-ed lab within our organization, which is an opportunity for any woman in our organization to come and with an idea for an opinion piece and to get scaffolding and help writing or just help editing, help placement. And what it has done is elevate exponentially the number of peaceful voices that are appearing in our op-ed pages across the nation, but specifically in response to this particular initiative across the state of Utah. And what it is doing is allowing individual members of our society to claim a voice in which they felt voiceless, and therefore sort of reduce their need to react with violence and anger because they know they have pathways to express themselves. So we're just so grateful for the opportunity we've had to do this work, and most particularly for the opportunity that we continue to try to do to exemplify a path of peace, even though in this case, we are specifically contending against some of our co-religionists.
Hello, everyone. My name is Shivani Parikh, and I'm a layperson. So forgive me if maybe my presentation of this is, less delivered in the great fashion of a sermon, but nonetheless, I'll strive to do my best. So I'm going to sort of set the case from it's a bit of a mid update of where it landed. So on December 5th, 2023, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund filed an appeal against the New York City Redistricting Commission and its Board of Elections. This case challenges the legality of the New York City Council's district map, which they presented to then hold for the next 10 years. And so the litigation, which began really in February 2023, was brought by the ALDEF's Democracy Program Director, Mr. Jerry Vetamala, on behalf of a group called Desi's Rising Up and Moving, as well as 18 other South Asian and Indo-Caribbean residents of Richmond Hill and South Ozone Park in Queens. This is a community that is immigrant rich and which is diverse by way of ethnicity, language, and immigration patterns. And so despite these communities overall voting cohesively, gerrymandering has silenced their voice in city politics. And this gerrymandering actually goes against the city charter, which says that towns or blocks that could be placed in multiple districts should be kept whole to ensure the fair and effective representation of racial and language minorities. Another way of saying this is that people are supposed to be kept together by ethno-linguistic lines. The current map divides this really vibrant community and makes it much harder for them to participate in New York City's democratic processes. And actually, the mobilization against these unfair maps, this is the second time this has happened because Sadhana's co-founder, Aminta Kilawan Narain, actually rallied folks from these same constituencies to try to have a more just map created back in 2012, 2013. And so this is really a continuation of a decades-long effort. So, you know, Queens, the most ethnically diverse borough in New York City, just to give some, again, further context, has always been home to South Asian immigrants from all over, you know, whether it's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, but then also by other migration patterns through Guyana, Trinidad, Suriname. So as we look ahead, unfortunately, the current district maps have been split in this community, and we don't know what the success of the ALDEF litigation will hold, because even if the courts, upon appeal, rule in favor, the maps will likely hold, and hopefully it'll actually just mean some sort of, you know, substantive due process to avoid a recreation of this reality in the future. But as the maps currently stand, yes, the South Asian Indo-Caribbean communities of Southeast Queens have been broken up in a way that dilutes their power. And so it's really essential to recognize how voter suppression affects faith communities who are already navigating challenges with housing, employment, and language access. And so this case, as it continues through the system, serves as a critical reminder that the fight for fair representation in our democracy is ongoing and crucial. And really, this, as it relates to interfaith organizing, is critical because we in the South Asian and Indo-Caribbean communities, while I'm speaking as someone from the Hindu community, there's a deep recognition from racial injustice, especially post 9/11, especially in New York City, that we look the same to racists, and we're perceived the same in terms of where we may, how we may vote by organizations which categorize us broadly by race. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of baggage that comes with some of these interfaith challenges and divisions. But as a young diaspora, we have the opportunity to also come together and be more effective and critical in how we might challenge preconceived notions about one another, because this is a point for us to really rally around. So interfaith organizing allows us to amplify our impact because this is a moral battle. Gerrymandering doesn't just divide communities physically, it actually fractures the bonds of trust and unity that holds us together as neighbors. It prevents us from having the collective power to improve our neighborhoods, schools, and livelihoods. And this is therein peacemaking in action, because peacemaking isn't just about resolving conflicts after they arise, it's about being affirmative and addressing the injustices, inequalities that breed division in the first place. And when we advocate for equitable representation in our democracy, we're working to ensure that every community has a voice in shaping our future. And so what I'll close on is a model for how Hindus come together to have these kind of critical discussions, which are called satsangs. So a satsang is a traditional community, Hindu community community gathering centered around spiritual teachings, reflection, and devotional practices. And the word itself comes from Sanskrit, where Sat means truth and Sang means association or gathering. And so there are a few different elements. One is spiritual discourse, which might involve listening to teachings or discourses about sacred texts, such as the Bhagavad Gita, Upanishads, or other scriptures. And these can be delivered by a guru or spiritual teacher or experienced member of the community. Often people sing bhajans or kirtans, which are devotional songs or chants that express devotion to God, or maybe the repetition of other divine names or mantras. There's meditation and reflection or guided to deepen one's connection to the divine, a discussion, question, answer session where folks ask questions about these teachings. And then finally, of course, there's a sense of community because there's usually some food. And so I look forward to, seeing how we continue to mobilize for the 2028 election, for the 2032 discussions that happen for when the maps are redrawn again. But this is really a learning lesson because we failed twice. So how can we make sure that third time's the charm? Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you, too. So a couple of things I want to pull out and just make sure you all are taking notes. Those of you who at the end of our call today will decide to be peacemakers, because what Jen and Shivani shared were practical applications of peacemaking that we endeavor to inspire you all and support you all in modeling in your states. Because it's one thing, I think, when you hear the brilliance behind the legal fight and you think, well, I'm not an attorney, I have no experience in law. Well, that's not my fight. But what attached to those legal battles, the two of them shared how they galvanized the voices within their faith community to leverage that. And that is a key part because, yes, we need to educate on the issues, but we also want people to be educated to the point where they will be motivated to act. And so that is sort of the practical outcomes that we want from this evening's call. And there was also a very beautiful nuance in both of what they shared in terms of the power of language, right? The power of language to disenfranchise and divide, but then also when it's utilized through the power of people of faith to unify and coordinate a community around their shared language of their values. And so thank you both for sharing. Why is that important? If your state doesn't have a redistricting, you know what it likely will have? Some legal recourse against shenanigans around delaying certification. So look at what they modeled in their state around the court battles for redistricting and fair representation and free government, right? Because that is when we talk about we want free elections, that is what we're talking about when we talk about redistricting. But when it comes to the certification of ballots, there's a legal recourse that states will take to fight that back to make sure that our transition of power is seamless. And so those practical tools that they shared are things that we can model to amplify in that fight to support the lawsuits if they arise in our state. So those are the notes to take. We'll circle back on that at the end. But the next and final pair of our peacemaker storytellers are two that really take what I just shared also in a very proactive way, very empowered way, taking the agency of not just being reactive to things that happen, but actually mobilizing their faith communities and faith leaders and faith influencers to become very visible stakeholders in the electoral process, to become firsthand resources. And so with the final two is Manilma Kaur from the Sikh Coalition. And she'll be talking about a national fellowship program that they launched this year around GOTV and democracy and some of the outcomes of that are very impactful. And then lastly, Aunt Andrew Lewis from the Temple in Atlanta, and sort of how they've dealt. Georgia's always in the news, but their recent rulemaking shenanigans that's causing confusion and how they've combated that as a faith community. So thank you. First up will be Manilmar.
Thank you, Dora. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining today. Honored to be speaking with all the other folks speaking to you. Like Dora said, my name is Manermal. I'm the Federal Policy Manager at an organization called the Sikh Coalition. The Sikh Coalition is the nation's largest Sikh civil rights organization. We were founded in 2001 in the immediate aftermath of September 11th, when there was kind of a wave of hate violence against the Sikh community, but also against several other faith communities. And in the 20 plus years since then, our work has expanded from hate crime policy advocacy is something we still do, but also a host of other civil rights issues, employment discrimination, religion-based bullying in schools, etc. And we've always done a little bit of work around elections and voting as far as community development work. We have a community development team that will kind of publish resources on like how do you vote, and where we can, we go into communities and answer folks' questions there. But this year we were kind of able to start doing this work in a much more robust way. This was through what we're calling our GOTV, or Get Out the Vote Fellowship. So we had members of the community from across the country, ages, I would say like late high school to college, apply to become fellows with our organization. The fellowship lasts from, it was, I think, started in July, and it goes all the way through the election. We just ask fellows to devote, a few hours a week to the work. And so we have 6 really great students, and many of them are in states that I would say are swing states, or states that have a lot of potential to make a big impact in the election, but also states that just have large populations of our community base, like California and New York. And we have them doing several things, but I think one of the most impactful parts of their fellowship so far is doing these tabling events where they go into Sikh houses of worship in their communities. These are called gurdwaras. They basically set up a table, and Sikh houses of worship, gurdwaras, generally have services once a week, and it's comprised of prayer, and then there's a portion where everyone gets to eat for free. It's called langar, one of the tenets of our religion, and so it's a place of worship, but it's also kind of functions as a bit of a community center. And so when someone's there in the main hall with a table, folks are really curious, especially when the person sitting at that table is one of the kids who grew up in that community, who people know. So I'm always surprised at how many people will approach someone doing a tabling event, and basically our fellows are just sitting there with their laptops open. They have their state's voter registration page up, so members of the community come up to them, ask what they're doing, and so our fellows are able to ask them, are you registered to vote? If you're not, here's where you can do it. They can help them through the online registration form. They answer any other questions they have about, how to vote by mail, or when are early voting dates, or where is my polling place, etc. A lot of our fellows speak Punjabi, which is a language that is often spoken by members of the Sikh community. So for folks who aren't English proficient, they often feel comfortable going up to our fellows and asking questions that they might not otherwise be able to get the answer to. And for folks that approach our fellows and are really interested in, they don't just want to register to vote, but they want to get involved further, our fellows will show them how to sign up to become poll workers or poll chaplains, so that, more members of our community see folks who look like us at the polls, so that voting is, I think, less of a daunting task. We have put out a spreadsheet that has voter deadlines, whether you need a voter ID or not in your state, what your early voting dates are, etc. So that's one of the tools we've made available to the community. And then the last one that I'll talk about very quickly is our voter hotline. So we worked with APIA Vote and Asian Americans Advancing Justice, who have both worked with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights to launch a hotline about basically to call in with your voting questions, where you can get answers in language. So in languages that are frequently spoken by members of the AAPI community, we work with them to add Punjabi to that hotline, so individuals who speak Punjabi can call in, ask their questions, and one of our fellows calls them back and answers their question in Punjabi. So those are some examples of some of the work we've been able to do this year.
Before I let her go, there was a dimension of your tabling I would love for you to talk about that was unique to me, and that was inviting election workers to the
Yes.
Gabata.
Yes, thank you. One of the things we've asked all of our fellows to do is reach out to their local county clerk's office, let them know, hey, we're doing these tabling events at our local Gurdwara that's in your jurisdiction. Can you send someone who works in your office, some kind of election official, to come with us to these tabling events to answer questions with us? You know, our fellows can answer questions to an extent, but there are questions that they can't answer that an election official can. And so that's something that I think was important to us because, you know, as important as it is to get our communities out to the polls and, you know, out to vote, it's also important to let election officials know that, hey, our communities are here and you can meet them here where they are too. And, you know, they deserve that kind of outreach as well.
Wonderful. Thank you. And then last is Andrew, who takes that paradigm and twists it. The floor is yours, Andrew.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak on the activities that we're doing here in Georgia. I'm Andrew Lewis. I lead the Rothschild Social Justice Institute Protecting Democracy group, which comes out of my synagogue, the Temple of Atlanta. The Temple takes a great deal of pride in our long history of civil rights justice, working our lead rabbi in the 50s and 60s, working with Dr. King. And we feel that the work that we're doing today is a continuation of that work. We are working with numerous faith leaders and faith organizations, the Carter Center, the King Center, across Atlanta and Georgia, to ensure our elections are two things: safe and vibrant. We have set up many different programs and events to try to do our best to, again, ensure a safe and vibrant election season. One thing that we're doing actually later this week on Thursday, we have faith leaders visiting the Fulton County Elections Hub. Fulton County is the most populated county in Georgia. So these faith leaders are going to visit the Fulton County Elections Hub to have a better understanding of our elections process and the security measures that are involved at an election center. This allows those faith leaders to be able to go back to their congregations, to their communities, and speak on their experiences of visiting the elections hub and understanding the process, understanding the security that is involved to help people feel comfortable that our elections are safe. Other things that we're doing, I personally worked with my synagogue's lead rabbi, Peter Berg, and created a video to promote the importance of having a voting plan, whether as an individual or for your family, but a voting plan so that it can be explained there is a need for a safe and vibrant election season. The video is structured for any faith to leader or faith organization to be able to use, whether it is sharing it directly or to use as a template to do something very similar for their own community. We are creating peace teams made up of clergy from many different faiths to be able to travel to hotspots on either election night or potentially in the days after the November 6th election, to be able to tamp down any hostilities or feelings that are boiling over in a community, so that we can try to address those issues as they pop up. In the best case scenario, all of our planning simply is not used, but we want to plan just in case. Last week, we held a panel discussion with election experts to discuss the various concerns that we are seeing here in Georgia, and also to talk about as well the numerous things that unite all of us as Americans. So we continue to work with all of our faith community partners in finding different avenues to try to ensure, again, that our election season between now and election day and in the days after are safe and vibrant.
Always the mute button. Thank you so much, Andrew. So again, I'm going to fold everyone in here now. I want to just thank all of you all for sharing before we move to sort of wrap up this evening with a call to action. But again, those last two peacemaker stories, right, are things that are practical that we are encouraging you all to duplicate and model in your states. And this is the whole breadth, if you will, of how we look to really activate peacemakers in this season from now until really the 100 days of the next presidency. Because again, the framing of this is there's a lot of fight to get access to the ballot box, but there are several battlegrounds beyond the ballot box that I hope we've highlighted very well for you this evening. And so here it is now, the moment you all have been waiting for. It is the call to action. And so please let me know if you all can see the screen. I tried to share it and it doesn't seem like it's working. I'm going to drop it into the chat as well, but I want a visual for those who will be watching this recording. But this is a QR code and a URL to access our call to action. It's also in the digital bulletin. Just 5 sort of framing actions that we want you all to consider taking away from this conversation this evening, of what things that you would be interested in and we want you to tell us. And if there's something that you all feel that you want to offer as an idea to enhance or expand the scope of what peacemakers will do in this moment, the very last question is an opportunity for you to share that. And so I'm going to drop the URL in there and just take a few minutes for you all, so to see that, for you all to just complete it. This is the moment where you say yes, you sign up to yes. I love what I've heard this evening from everyone. And there's a part of this that I feel that I can do now or within the coming months. And so while you all do that, I'm going to share the last piece of the program, the digital balloon, just to close us out from a faith lens. So give me one. So on the back of the program, we have, what do faiths say about peacemaking from 6 major faith traditions, just for some framing of the sacred text that grounds the work that we're doing in this very political and violent framework, right? Our sacred text, our grounding in our faith values really frames and should undergird us throughout our work. So I'll begin from the Buddhist faith tradition. One should reflect, may all be happy and secure. May all beings be happy at heart. From the Christian faith tradition, let us then pursue what makes for peace and for mutual upbuilding. From the Hindu tradition, come together, talk together. Let our minds be in harmony. Perfect be the union among us. From the Jewish faith tradition, the world rests on 3 things: on justice, on truth, and on peace. And all 3 are one. From the Muslim faith tradition, do not make your oath by Allah an excuse against making peace among people. And lastly, from the Sikh tradition, he who lowers his mind to the dust of all men's feet sees the name of God enshrined in every heart. And with that, I want to thank you all for being with us this evening. If you have any comments, feedback, questions, please send it to organizing@faithinpubliclife.org. Again, organizing@faithinpubliclife.org. And those of you who are signing up this evening to become a peacemaker will follow up in the coming days with resources specific to the area of interest that you noted on the form for the call to action. So I want to thank our peacemaking storytellers once again. You all have absolutely blessed and enriched me in preparing for this evening. And I just want to thank you and continue to look forward to working with you all as leaders in this space of peacemaking. Thank
Sorry,
you all.
Dora,
And have,
sorry to interrupt, but the link
okay.
doesn't allow us to do anything. It says we need permission from the org.
Oh, goodness. For the link for the
The call to action.
call to action. Okay,
Yes.
I will, what I'll do is I will email it directly to everyone that attended tonight as soon as we close out. Thank you for that. Technology, I tell you. It only works. And also, I also that you know the links in the digital program didn't work as well. So I'll email all of the links that I shared in the chat this evening and make sure that access is granted for the call to action. Like of all the things that couldn't go right. So thank you all again. And I look forward to working with you all. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.